Hello, everyone. Survivor Specialist McKenna and John are back, and we are talking episode 12 of season 44, but in the past. John?
Yeah, that's right. McKenna, I don't know how you felt about this episode, but we've been talking the last few weeks about how season 44 has kind of had a bit of an old school feel to it, where we don't see a bunch of advantages. We've had some I think this is the 5th straight up vote in a row that we've had.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, straight up being like a single immunity advantage, or immunity idol, everything else pretty straightforward.
Yep.
This was reminding me of old school Survivor in a bad way this week, though.
How so, John? How so?
I didn't like this episode. I know Phil kind of talked about this. This is a boring episode. I know there are a lot of people who say there was a lot of tension with, is Carolyn actually going home this episode? I didn't personally feel that with the way the edit was going. I felt it was a little disjointed in the edit. There were a lot of quick cuts that didn't quite fill in enough spaces, but alas, season's still good, right? We're going into a finale, which I hope is really exciting and isn't just 3 people dominating everything, but we'll see.
Yeah, so to aid to some people's boringness of this episode, we have decided to watch Borneo. We are watching Borneo episode 11. It's called Long Hard Days over on the Patreon. So I'm sorry, Phil, to any patrons we might lose this due to this episode, but we're doing Borneo, and I'm excited.
We are, and in all honesty, that episode
honestly, it fits rather everything. Well.
Yeah, it's really apt for what this episode is, and I think that really goes to speak of how old school of an episode this week felt. We are at a point where we have a alliance that is now dominating the game. They should be looking internally if they want to work on their own way of getting to the end, but they're not quite sure if that's the right way to go yet. It's a lot of will they, won't they talk on the beach, kind of more an analysis of other people and how they'll react to things rather than focusing on what they're doing themselves. It really does kind of just feel like a Borneo type episode.
Yes, which means I loved this episode. But anyway, let's dive in. We are going to talk a little bit about idol hunts in the dark, or at night, or in the wee hours of the morning when we have that beautiful blue purple camera and not the bright colors of the daytime. So why don't we get into Tony, Winners at War?
Yeah, I mean, I think Tony's kind of our most prolific one because he's gone on record afterwards saying, I can't sleep, so I go hunt for idols at night. And we actually got to see that at Winners at War, where he takes his little coconut husk and lights it and uses that to guide himself around the forest. I think it's really prolific when we're talking about hunting in the dark. I think it's one of those moments you think of a lot more because it is, and I get it, it is a more recent moment. But it's also cool seeing this innovation in Survivors of Tony having to find a light so he can kind of find his way. Because I think one of the things that's really lost on viewers sometimes is how dark it is when there is no sunlight.
Or when you're not surrounded by just the fire.
Yeah. And there's, trees obscuring any chance of a moon or anything like that. If you have never been out of the city, if you have never been to a place completely devoid of light pollution, nature's really dark. Let me tell you, as someone who lived in the middle of nowhere,
I was just going to say,
when you experience true darkness, it is terrifying. Because the first time I experienced it, I was coming out of a parking lot. I looked left. Oh, there are no cars. I look right, and I'm like, I don't think there are any cars. I can't see anything. Oh, right. I just see this void of empty black. Because that's what the world's like when there's no light. So that's why we don't see a lot of these idol hunts at night in the dark, and why we have the comment in this week's episode of Carson saying, it's just becoming dawn and Heidi's starting to get up to look for the idol. It's because you can't see at night. So having Tony actually use fire to guide him, it's a risky thing for him to do, because I'm pretty sure that fire is going to be pretty noticeable wherever you are in the forest. But it's a great way of capturing, I think, this essence of Survivor that we kind of lose through the gaze of technology sometimes.
Yeah, and then a different kind of twist is the production aspect of go find this idol at night. So we have that with Jeremy in Second Chances when he's finding his second idol, I believe, is the one where he finds in the dark. He gets a clue and is just like, go to this place in the middle of the night. There'll be torches to like signal you. And he then hunts for his idol in the middle of the night.
Yeah, and this one's kind of cool because it's different, right? Because this is production telling Jeremy, hey, you only have this very small window to find this thing. It's not going to be hard for you to find. In fact, it was quite easy for him to find. But it's still like this journey at night. And night is one of those times that we don't explore a lot in Survivor. Because we usually get like those post-tribal moments are usually nighttime, obviously. And we get the odd like night scene. But night, it's just hard to capture night.
Yep, exactly. Camera. And a lot of them are probably asleep as soon as they can be because of the way the sun works. And they're probably up at the crack of dawn.
Yeah, exactly, right? Like your circadian rhythm is just going to change so much when you're out there on the beach. I mean, we already hear from survivors that they don't tend to sleep that often. They maybe get like 2 or 3 hours. So when it's pitch black out there, that's when you want to be falling asleep because it's your only opportunity really to get that without any like light seeping in through your eyelids.
Yeah. And so now, again, a slightly different version is Ty. He had a clue from his previous beach. Now he's swapped onto a new beach and is like, let's see if this works. Goes to the well in the middle of the night, drenches the well in water to find the like hidden clue, and then digs where he needs to dig, and then there's his second idol. So that's another kind of different twist on finding the idols at night when he had a clue from his last beach.
Yeah, and I mean that's something that's really missing in Survivor nowadays, and especially like with this episode of 44, we don't see them finding a clue or an idol. So either they're hiding it from us so that it's a big reveal in the finale. They didn't find the idol that was planted, or no idol was planted, right? So when you look back at Ty and how he's able to find this idol in the dark because of these clues, like it's harkening back on an older time of Survivor that we don't get anymore, where idols are kind of just there. And Ty finding this is so interesting because it is cross beach, which is something you don't know is always true in Survivor, if it's going to be at the same spot or not.
Yeah, exactly. And then we have Ben, who once he plays an idol, that next morning, bright early, as soon as his eyes open, he's out looking. And then we even see like confessionals from people being like, no, we're not going to chase him. He can't already have it, blah, 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 because he like it's not there. It's fine. We're good. Don't worry about it. And he comes in basically walking with the idol in his boot. He has it. So it's like that kind of is close to this moment of an idol was just played. Let me go find it. And then other people talking about somebody going out and looking for this idol. But to give them credit here in this episode, they actually did something about it and were looking themselves to try and find it.
Yeah, I mean, to the surprise of no one, 44 gives us another group idol hunt, essentially. I think it's the fourth one this season.
Something like that, yeah.
It might be more. We have this one. We had the last one where Heidi finds her idol. We had...
the group advantage hunt.
Yeah, the group advantage hunt. We had a lot of like group hunts when it came to the bird cage. I'll tell you what, McKenna, I don't like group idol hunts. I'm out. I'm out on them. I'm out on them. You know, we've seen more in this season than I think we referred to when we were actually talking about group idol hunts.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm done with them. I'm done with them.
Yeah.
Hide Idol's better production, which maybe you did. Maybe you did. So I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt.
Well, I think it's just the players are now becoming more savvy of like, let's go look for this thing. And they're like, well, I'm not going to just let this person go off by themselves and look. So it's like they've hid them decently well, but it's also like we know Survivor now. Instead of like some people just being like, oh, there's a hidden immunity idol at play. Maybe let's look for it.
That's true. That's very true. And I
Also,
do
set them up for the group idol hunts with the birdcage being out in the open.
Oh, absolutely. I do commend Heidi's initiative here because, like we were talking about with Ben, that's why Ben finds so many idols. I know, like, people complain about how many idols Ben found in HHH, but he had the initiative. He was going for them right away. Yes, he knew he could figure out how to find them. Yes, some of them seemed really easy to find. But the point being, he went out and no one else on that cast was going out to look for them too. Like,
right.
That's the type of initiative you need. So you have to commend Heidi when she's doing that type of thing in this episode where, yes, Carson, this was one of the weird things about this episode. Carson was narrating Heidi going for the idol, which I found really weird.
Like, I get being like, oh, I saw Heidi, so I got up too. But what about Heidi's backstory of, oh, Carolyn just played an idol. Let me go up and look. Like,
it was just weird. It was, again, it's kind of like what my big complaints about this episode were. Like, there were weird editing choices. Like, that type of thing should set up Carson finding an idol, but he doesn't find an idol this episode.
Or going home this episode.
Yeah, exactly. It's those little things where it's like, okay, Carson's narrating a lot of this episode. Is he going home? But as the episode played out, like, it didn't really come to that.
Yeah. So now we're going to go to the reward challenge. And the reward is a trip to the sanctuary where they're going to get kind of a spa knockoff reward of a foot rub and some food. So we were just going to kind of talk about these like spa rewards. And yes, a lot of them they stay overnight for, which this one did not. But, you know, we've obviously got to touch upon the Keith going to the spa. Because that's just that moment of like, all right, so would my friends believe that I'm out here in a spa or on the moon? Yeah, on the moon. Definitely, that's the one they'd go with.
Yeah, and of course we covered that episode in depth on the Patreon. That was actually just happened to be the episode of San Juan del Sur we saw. That was a big spa visit because it was that's the challenge where Missy bungs up her ankle. And John gives up his reward so that Baylor can go. It's a good spa visit. And like I do think these spa visits, as they are, you know, pretty regular in Survivor, I think they're an important part of Survivor as a reward. As a late
one of the
game
more
reward.
infamous reward challenges are the spa or like the going away getting a massage kind of reward, because they give us some really good moments and really hilarious moments actually.
Yeah, and they happen late enough in the game that they tend to be important when they do, right? It gives people a lot of time to talk strategy away from themselves. Yeah. Most of the time they are overnight, which also helps. But it's just that removing people from camp so that there are two separated groups, right? It's kind of important. And like, that's why when we look back at some of these like other spa rewards, right? Like we look at something like Cook Islands.
Yeah.
Right? with Aussie Poverty and Aussie Poverty. And I did say the R. It was just very subtle, I swear. Aussie Parvati and Yule when they're there and, you know, getting naked and wailing.
Trying to flirt so Parvati can like inch her way into the alliance, try not to be next.
But like, that's one of the big things, right? Like, it's happening so late in the game that type of strategy talk can happen there. And like the three of them, it feels it feels like when you're at a reward that late in the game, you can still have some influence on the game.
And I feel like that specific reward affected her fans versus favorites reward of, oh my gosh, she's going to flirt with everything that walks, because of this kind of game move that she's doing here to try and inch her way one vote closer.
Yeah, exactly. I think that reward was, like you said, like just pivotal in Survivor history. And like the interesting thing with these spa things is like, okay, this time, I mean, they went to the Survivor Sanctuary where good things happen, because that was the thing that happened in this episode too. It was a little weird, but you know what? Tell us whatever you want, Survivor. And it was like, because it wasn't a full spa. It was like this small foot massage, right? Like it wasn't any like big massage or anything like that. So, I mean, one of the earliest challenge and reward to feature a massage as part of the reward is in Borneo,
which we're going to watch an episode of. So join the Patreon.
We're going to watch that episode of. That is that episode. That is the episode where Dr. Sean wins the trivia challenge and goes on the yacht overnight. He gets a massage, and like they're talking about the fact that he's never had a massage in his life and stuff like that. Again, like it's these little moments, and even then, like we'll dive into it more. But we were talking about how these spa rewards can often kind of like shape the way the game goes. Look at the conversations that happen based on who Sean decides to take to breakfast on that reward.
Yeah, exactly. But we're not going to tell you that now. We're going to tell you that over on the Patreon. Yeah. We're going to go into our next one, which is hilarious. It's Panama. So Sari, Aris, and Danielle go on this spa reward. They get like a mud massage. And Danielle picks one of the guys because she thinks the guy is just going to get like right into the muscles. And boy, he did. And she was just like screaming in pain, like, oh, ow, ow, ow. And he was like got deep tissue into that. And Sari just has confessionals laughing like she does because Danielle was not having a great time with the massage.
Yeah, it's funny. And that's the thing that massage. Well, the one thing I have learned from Survivor over the last 23 years, a lot of people have never had massages before.
Yes.
And they have a poor idea of how exactly they work. Let me tell you, listeners, do yourself a favor and go get a massage. It'll make you feel better.
It will. And then we have talked about Korong a little bit here with the medevac, the triple medevac, or well, Caleb, but triple heat stroke. But we're gonna go to a different medevac here, and it's the one and only Joe Del Campo, because this spa reward that they go on is the one where Joe gets his steak and he can't poop.
Yeah, and I think this is one of the big things when it comes to these spa rewards is there are a lot of good things, but like the overindulgence of rewards can not end well. And I think it's really, this is the one thing that I thought was really weird about this reward this week. They just had sandwiches, and like those didn't look like appetizing sandwiches. And you know what? You know how I know they weren't appetizing sandwiches? Jeff didn't describe them at all at the challenge.
He just said sandwiches?
Yeah, he didn't go in and talk about how mouth-watering and like juicy these sandwiches are. Like nothing. No description of these sandwiches at all.
All right, well, we'll have to double check with a castaway who was on this reward and see if those sandwiches were good.
I'm sure they're great when you have not eaten for most of like 26 days. But
yeah, and then the last one we want to talk about is the Karamoan spa reward, where they had just done stuff in the mud and they make them fly on the plane all muddy, and then Philip Shepard just is like, I'm gonna dive in this pool, and turns it brown. And then everyone's just like, what the hell? The shower is right there. You're supposed to shower off before you go into the pool.
Yeah, it's one of those moments where it's like Philip Shepard just being Philip Shepard, right?
Mm-hmm.
He gets that moment of, yes, we're on reward. I am going to make this reward absolutely miserable for everyone just by like not thinking things through. Love Philip so much, but this was a
I mean, this
very
channel loves
nearsighted
Philip so
action.
much.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the next segment we want to get to is something John wanted to point out, and it's called Survivors Not Knowing How to Do Math. John, take it away.
It's just been so frustrating over the last couple of weeks to hear the Tika 3 talk about having a majority in the 6. And like, Carson, you're a rocket scientist. You should know better than this. But they keep talking about having a majority. And I get what they're talking about. They have this plurality within this group of 6. There are 3 of them. They should be able to control the votes. It only takes one more person. Let me talk to you about some like survivor math once we get to tribal council. But 3 is not a majority of 6. And it just bugs me. It bugs me. But it lets us talk about some of these really funny moments in survivor history when there's been bad math. Of course, I think the most infamous one is Brad Culpepper math, as he's trying to figure out exactly how to split the votes and how many votes they need. And he's just sitting there in Game Changers, like giving his confessional, and it's so funny. So funny. I am a big Brad Culpepper stan when it comes to like his Game Changers game and everything. And this is the moment why I think Brad Culpepper is a more respected player.
Is it not in Blood versus Water?
Oh, it might have been Blood versus Water.
I want to say it's in Blood versus Water.
Let's do it more than once.
No, we just think it happens more than once. I want to say it's Blood versus Water.
It might be Blood versus Water.
He wears the same.
He wears the same clothes. It's hard to tell sometimes. Point being, Brad Culpepper, bad at math, just like John, bad at remembering which of the 2 seasons Brad Culpepper was doing good things on.
Aren't we supposed to know this stuff?
We are. But you know what? When they dress exactly the same, sometimes it's hard to trigger our memories.
And then, obviously, 10 days is 2 weeks for Tony.
Yes, 10 days is 2 weeks. I mean, that's, again, one of those, like, really hilarious conversations because you understand where Tony's coming from, but it makes no sense.
So we're going to head on over to this immunity challenge, and it is called Rollerball / Take the Reins / but not really Pegs Over Easy. So rollerball is where they stand on a small perch or log with a plate and then add a ball in at different intervals. And then take the reins is what we had this week. And that is a disc balancing on some ropes, and you have to step back further and try not to let the ball fall over. And then Pegs Over Easy, they say is the same challenge. It's absolutely not the same challenge. But that happened in Island of the Idols. It's where they had this table with balls resting in certain slots. And if you dip the table down too far, the pegs would rise and the balls would be pushed out of their slots. And if you lost all 3, you were out of the challenge. Anyway, that does not count. So rollerball, the first time we saw this was in Redemption Island with Natalie Tannerelli winning it over Mike Chisel. Let's bring Mike into the podcast, everyone. Welcome.
Yeah, this is back to the merge. This is despite the fact that this is Redemption Island, it was not a duel. It was just the individual challenge. It's interesting that this challenge, which almost feels newer than Redemption Island, right? It feels like something that's like happened more, and I think it's because of like the persona that Jeff has in this challenge. A lot of the times, go listen to Phil and Alexa's show last night if you haven't already heard it. Phil gives you the full quote of Jeff talking about handling balls in this challenge, and it's kind of like one of those things that Jeff really does. And in the early 20s, we weren't quite to the point where we were getting Jeff Probst making ball jokes.
I think the biggest one was in Edge of Extinction, right? I think that was like the most egregious, like
David versus Goliath, wasn't it?
Oh, David versus Goliath. Okay, close enough.
with the balls coming together or separating and dropping and all of those fun.
All right, moving on. One World was the next time we saw that. and Troyzan won over Kat.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty straightforward, right? This is Troyzan fighting for his life at this point.
Ko-Rong, Nick won over Ty, and then David versus Goliath, Mike won over Allison and Nick.
One of the really interesting things with this challenge is it tends to be a lot earlier than we saw it this time.
Yes, for sure. We saw like in Redemption Island and One World, it's the first individual immunity challenge of the season.
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting seeing this used later on in the game. It's totally fine. It's definitely one of those challenges that it doesn't matter where you put it in the order of things. But it was just interesting to see. That's the type of decision I'd really like to know from the production standpoint of like when they're choosing a challenge, where it places in the individual portion of the game, especially when it is in essentially complete contrast to the place where you've placed it previously.
Yeah. And then we see Take the Reins, which is this season. And then the first time we saw it was in San Juan del Sur, where Keith wins over Wes.
I think I prefer Take the Reins to Rollerball. I think Rollerball has given us a lot better like Jeff euphemisms, but I think Take the Reins is a more interesting challenge because I think there are different ways of approaching it based on like the amount of slack you put on it. Obviously, as we saw last night, you kind of want to be really tight and then hold on incredibly still so that these balls are moving around and stuff. But if you're so rigid, you risk like tiring out, and then like you risk that like the slightest movement makes your ball fall. So I think Take the Reins just gives another element to it, which makes you have to actually apply strategy to this challenge.
Yeah, I think I like Take the Reins a little bit better, but I want to try both of them out. I think it's a lot of fun. We also see it then reappear with Keith once again, and he takes on Golden Boy Joe Anglem, but he winds up losing this challenge to Joe, and I believe giving Joe his first, or it's either first or second individual.
It's pretty early, yeah.
So, and then after that, we see it in Ghost Island, where Chelsea Townsend, Queen, wins over Sebastian. I love Chelsea Townsend because she's purpled in that season.
Yeah, somehow we learned this season that being purpled isn't the worst type of edit you can get. But I'll talk about that in a little bit.
And then the Pegs Over Easy, which we explained a little bit earlier, which is not the same challenge, was in Island of the Idols.
Yeah, so I think the inclusion of Pegs Over Easy into this like grouping of challenges is ball being balanced, essentially. I don't think it's the same. I get how it could be a variation of the challenge, but that was more of a like hold this thing up as much as you can, rather than a balance this thing as long as you can. I think like the mechanics of the game are quite different there.
Yeah,
and it's wild to me. We've talked about this a lot, which is nice because we kind of talk about how in the pre-merge challenges are kind of boring and repeated over and over again with like the obstacle course then puzzle, and we're talking about these challenges we know in the individual portion here. We recognize them. They feel like they've been used a lot, but they haven't actually, and they haven't. And, we've had a long gap between them. The fact that we haven't seen hold or Take the Reins since Ghost Island, that was 8 seasons ago. Like it's been a while. Yeah,
or any iteration. The last one we saw was David versus Goliath, which is slightly ahead of that one. So it's like we haven't seen it in a few seasons now, and it was almost like I forgot about it. I was like, oh yeah, that one, right. I like this challenge.
I think this one felt a little more recent because it was in the Blood versus Water season of Australian Survivor. So it was in the last year.
Remember.
It was in the last year that we watched. But like that's why I'm saying is like this challenge feels like something that's really familiar. It feels like it's there all the time. And as much as we condemn production for reusing challenges, I think we're at the point where we kind of have to commend them for how they are approaching individual challenges.
I feel like it's okay in the individual phase, though. Like, not that you can repeat it being like, I know Take the Reins is going to be at the first individual immunity, so where you can practice and kind of game it. Yeah. I guess I'm more frustrated with the tribal challenges because it's the same formula. If they switch up the formula but keep the same components, then I think it's a whole fresh challenge. But it's just the whole obstacle course puzzle of it all. But throw the puzzle in at a checkpoint, and then it's a completely different challenge.
Yeah, exactly. And I think like one of the big things here is because there was a time where we were very upset about how individual challenges were being run. I'm looking at you, 41. There were so many it was just like the same like balance challenge. And we've seen production vary that since then. We've seen these individual challenges get a lot more varied. And while, yes, we're still pulling on these previous challenges that have been created, we're pulling them in a way where it's varying the challenges in a single season of Survivor, which is really important.
Yeah. So our last segment we're getting to is bringing stuff to Tribal Council. So this kind of is a new thing for Survivor, is at the final 6 Tribal Council, bring some stuff because you're going to be changing beaches, and we're going to make this a little bit tougher on the final 5. Now, since they've been able to watch some seasons, they knew we might be switching beaches. Let's bring some stuff. Lauren, you got the rice since you're the only one for sure going to be here. So, I think this is starting a newer era of Survivor where they're expecting this twist, kind of like Heroes versus Villains, where they're expecting to merge and bringing all their stuff to a challenge.
Yeah, but it was more hilarious in Heroes vs. Villains because they had to reset their camp afterwards.
I know, but still, like, we saw this in Island of the Idols. We've seen it in the 40s, well, except for Winners at War, but we've seen it in the rest of the 40s, where you're going to a new camp and join the struggle bus.
Yeah,
the 40s should feel a little bit slighted because they don't get the mansion that Rob and Sandra had.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the reasons why. They also haven't had the immunity idol after this. They've only had, like, the challenge advantage instead. But I just think it's so predictable now, you know? And part of me feels like production loved this. Jeff probably loved it that they're able to predict this. Part of me hopes they hated it because there is no reason to do this change at all. And I think it's time we got it.
Yeah. Now that they brought all their stuff to Tribal Council, I think it was like a great move for this season. But after they've caught on, nope, we're switching things up. We're gonna swap them at 6, or like if you really need to swap the beaches, we'll swap them at 6. We'll swap them at 4. We'll swap them at 8. You know, like
it's interesting. There was rampant speculation on Twitter today that the reason they do it is they can set up the tribe camps for the next season that films right afterwards. I don't think that's actually a thing. Hilarious theory, though.
Well, John,
there were a couple of things I wanted to say. There were a couple of things.
Yes, that is all of our notes, like official segments for this episode. But I know John wanted to say a few things about the episode.
Because again, like, we're talking Borneo tomorrow on the Patreon. It's great because you know what? It's really important to revisit these early moments in Survivor to see what we've learned. And what this episode showed me is that I didn't learn a lot about editing. There's a lot of like confusing things in this episode that don't add up. We have Jam calling Jamie a threat, and we haven't seen that at all throughout the season. That I am completely like leaning on the editors because I think Jamie has like the worst edit in Survivor history. Yeah, I think she has a worse edit than people who have been purpled in this game because she was just clowned on the entire season.
Yeah, it's hard trying to get to know and like someone when they're given, oh man, that was a tough challenge, or I'm just going to breathe through this and it'll be okay. Like, that's kind of a joke when you give them those confessionals. And I'm sure, because like Jamie was great at delivering those confessionals, so I'm sure there's some sort of strategy information that she gave to the producers that could have been used somewhere. Throw the girl a bone.
Yeah. And instead, we have her final words referencing finding an idol and being like her one goal in survival. And we know that she didn't actually find an idol. Like, that hurts. Jamie doesn't deserve this.
And Matt was out of the game. Or Matthew, sorry. Matthew was out of the game for a while now. Like, it's just, I don't know. They did her dirty. And Jamie, you rock. You were on one of my draft teams. So, power to Jamie.
Yeah, I love Jamie. She's just, her positive attitude is very infectious. And I loved seeing her this season. Now, the other thing I want to talk about, I'm going back to Survivor math because I'm going to throw some math at you here, McKenna.
I'm a lesbian. I can't do math.
How many people were left in the game this episode prior to the vote?
There were 6 people. And
there were 6 people.
And then there were 5 after Jamie left?
Yes, so there are 6. And 3 of them are from the same tribe, the Tika 3, right? Mm-hmm. They seem to have all the power because they're in a plurality here, not a majority. And Heidi works with them, votes out Jamie here. Mm-hmm. Lauren wins immunity. Lauren can't be voted for. Mm-hmm. Jamie gets votes from Tika. Mm-hmm. Heidi plays her idol for herself. Mm-hmm. How many people are now immune from being voted out?
2.
2. And 2 people are each receiving 3 votes.
Yes.
In that instance, we go to Rocks.
Right.
How many non-Tika members are eligible to go home through Rocks?
0.
Yeah, I just think, like, I don't know what Heidi's thinking here. Phil mentioned it yesterday. I think
it was a stressful math equation.
I think Heidi has a much closer relationship with Jam Jam than we're seeing. Mm-hmm. Because like something's not adding up here.
Right.
Again, editing making no sense because it doesn't make, like, we didn't see a single. The reason why you could tell Carolyn wasn't going home last night is because there wasn't a single conversation between Heidi, Jamie, and Lauren discussing the vote.
Well, we also saw that Heidi didn't want Jam Jam out at that one other tribal council where she got to give the votes. And I think she had a connection with Jam Jam that, like, is super strong. And I think Jam Jam, she knows that Jam Jam will cut the other 2 at some point. So might as well, keep it rolling. But
so my point being here, and how this is wrapping up in like Survivor Rewind, this and why I felt this episode felt really, really old school Survivor. This is exactly the type of situation I think we see in Borneo, in this episode of Borneo we're talking about tomorrow. So tune into the Patreon tomorrow, $10 and $20 patrons, to listen to us talk about it.
Yes, we are talking Borneo Long Hard Days, episode 11, and I am excited.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. As much as, like, I'm not the biggest Borneo guy, because I think the game is...
I'll make him be the biggest Borneo guy you've ever seen. It's
still fun going back. Borneo still has its highlights sometimes.
Yes.
But right. Anything else, McKenna?
No, that's it from me.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in. Things are a little different this week because we're in finale season now. We only have 1 episode of the season left. Mm-hmm. So we do still have Phil and Alexa doing their predictions of power rankings with season 43's Owen night this week. It's going to be a little later. It's going to be at 9:15 Eastern. So it's later, but that's going to be one to check out for sure. Phil and Alexa won't be doing their recap right after the finale because the 4 of us are all going to be at Bryce and Wendell's finale party in Brooklyn this week. They are going to do their episode recap on Thursday night. that Thursday night as well. We don't usually talk about the movie buff specialist here. I'm going to, because next Thursday, Phil and I are going to be finishing our top 100s. We are at number 1, finally, after 2.5 years. We're at number 1. It's a big episode for us. So come listen to the conclusion of that series and find out what we're doing for the next series after that. And then McKenna and I are going to be a little later in the week.
Yeah, we'll be sometime, because John also has a flight to catch on Thursday.
Yeah, I have to go back across the continent. So it's a busy week for us, but don't worry. We'll be back with more Survivor coverage to finish off what's hopefully going to be a very eventful finale.
Yes. Alrighty, everyone. So tune in to the Patreon tomorrow.